Have you ever caught yourself mid-thought and wondered, who's really thinking this? Not the words on the surface, not the voice in your head that sounds like you, but the impulse behind the thought. Have you ever paused long enough to notice the automatic patterns firing through your mind like a script written by someone else? Imagine this. You're walking down the street. Someone bumps into you. Your jaw tightens. Before you even register it, a story is already forming. How rude. People have no awareness anymore. Or was it a reflex, a preloaded emotional program launched by an invisible trigger? It feels like your thought. It sounds like you. But was it really you who authored it? Now expand that. Think about your outrage when you scroll past a headline. The envy that coils quietly in your stomach when you see someone living the life you secretly crave. The defensiveness you feel when someone questions your beliefs. What if none of those were conscious thoughts, but almost never to pause? What if they were merely reactions, the mind's pre-installed reflexes, dressed up to look like choices? But true thinking, the kind that comes from silence, discomfort, and radical honesty, is so rare. It's practically extinct. You live in a culture that celebrates opinions, but forgets to ask, where do opinions come from? It makes you question your desires, your beliefs, your identity, everything you've used to cushion yourself from the unknown. We've confused noise for consciousness, speed for clarity, and reactivity for thought. We're trained from birth to react, to like, to dislike, to comment, to defend, to share, to buy, to believe, to reject. And here's the paradox. The more convinced you are that you're thinking, the less likely it is that you actually are. Because real thinking is slow. Real thinking hurts. It dismantles the lies you've been comforted by. That because you can argue, you are informed. That because you can choose between option A and option B, you are free. But feeling alive is not the same as being awake. It forces you to hold contradictory truths in your hands and not run. But reaction feels better. It's quick, it's fiery, it gives you something to do. You feel alive when you react. So ask yourself, when you defend your opinion, are you protecting truth or are you defending your conditioning? A confrontation with the raw, unfiltered machinery of your own mind. When you feel rage at a comment, is it justice or is it your ego recoiling from cognitive dissonance? When you chase a dream, is it really yours or was it sold to you by a culture that monetizes your insecurity? Because if you've never slowed down long enough to ask why you believe what you believe, then you're not thinking. You're echoing, you're reacting. You're participating in a loop disguised as autonomy. They distract themselves with outrage, validation, or dopamine. And this is the great illusion of our time, that because you can speak, you are conscious. But what if the entire framework is rigged? What if even your preferences aren't yours? What if the thoughts you fight to defend are just echoes from your past parental commands, social cues, unhealed trauma, and cultural propaganda pretending to be you? Here is the uncomfortable truth most people will never face. You cannot begin to think clearly until you admit how much of your life has been lived unconsciously. So what happens when you finally stop reacting? What do you find in that stillness? Not clarity, not peace, but chaos. And it is only in that chaos that real thought begins. But most people never make it that far. They feel the discomfort rising, and they reach for the nearest distraction. They numb, they scroll, they lash out. Because it's easier to react than to think, and the system is built to keep it that way. So the question is no longer, are you thinking? It's, who benefits when you don't? What if everything you believe is the result of a nervous system trained to flinch, not to reflect? What if your mind is not a mirror, but a battlefield? And if that's true, then how do you reclaim it? You were never taught how to think. You were taught how to comply. Not in the obvious, authoritarian way, but in the subtle, everyday rituals of modern life. From the classroom to the office, from advertisements to social media, you were trained to consume information, not to question it. And over time, that consumption became your identity. You were rewarded for the right answers, not for asking the right questions. You were praised for speed, for cleverness, for memorization, not for wisdom, depth, or silence. So your mind adapted. It learned how to mimic intelligence, not embody it. But deep beneath your persona, the curated, compliant version of you, something more primal operates. Carl Jung called it the complex, a cluster of unconscious emotions, memories, and reactions that hijack your thinking without your awareness. You think you're responding to reality, but you're actually reacting to buried experiences, unresolved pain, and inherited beliefs. Take anger, for example. Someone disrespects you. You lash out. It feels righteous, like you're standing up for yourself. But dig deeper, and you may find a childhood wound where your voice was dismissed, your boundaries ignored. You're not responding to the present. You're reliving the past. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this too, how most people live in a reactive state, governed by the morality of the herd. They believe they're moral because they conform. They believe they're wise because they obey. But it's not morality. It's fear in disguise. The fear of exclusion, judgment, and uncertainty masquerading as thoughtfulness. And this fear becomes a parasite. It attaches itself to every idea you hold. You start to filter the world not through truth, but through safety. You believe what won't get you rejected. You think in ways that keep you comfortable. You avoid what feels threatening even if it's real. Schopenhauer believed that we are ruled more by our will, our blind, irrational drives, than by reason. And neuroscience agrees. Modern studies show that most of your decisions happen before your conscious mind is even aware of them. The brain reacts emotionally first, then it rationalizes after the fact. Thought becomes a puppet show logic playing catch-up with instinct. That means the stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you believe, and why you act are mostly fiction. Elaborate post hoc justifications to maintain the illusion of self-control. And here's where it gets more disturbing. Society doesn't just tolerate this reactivity, it depends on it. Because a reactive mind is predictable. A reactive mind is controllable. You click the outrage bait. You buy the product that promises instant relief. You vote out of fear. You conform to avoid judgment. You attack to feel powerful. But none of it is thinking. It's survival repackaged as personality. This is why true self-awareness is so rare. Because to think for yourself means to lose everything that protects your ego. You must question the teachings of your parents, the rules of your culture, the voice in your head that says, "This is just how I am." And when you do that, when you go deep enough, it shatters your identity. You realize most of what you called me was just defense mechanisms wearing costumes. So the real problem isn't that you react. It's that you believe your reactions are truth. You say, "I'm anxious," but never ask, "Who told me I had to always be achieving?" You say, "I'm offended," but never wonder, "What part of me feels threatened?" You say, "This is just how the world works," but never ask, whose benefit does that belief serve? And every time you skip that inquiry, every time, you avoid the uncomfortable silence where truth might speak, you reinforce the prison. You become less of a person and more of a program. This is why thinkers like Sartre insisted that freedom is a burden most cannot bear. Because to be truly free means to confront the abyss of not knowing. It means abandoning ready-made scripts and becoming the author of your own thoughts. It means looking into the mirror with no filters, no justifications, and seeing what stares back. Most people never do. They live their entire lives mistaking noise for wisdom, reactivity for consciousness, and comfort for clarity. But not because they're incapable, because they were never taught to pause. And in that pause, where your reaction would usually fill the silence, there's a door. A terrifying, beautiful door. One that leads away from conditioning and toward awareness. You don't notice the cost at first, because the effects of unconscious reactivity aren't sudden. They are slow, subtle, cumulative. They wear you down over time, like a whisper that becomes a law. At first, it just feels like stress, like you're always behind, always comparing, always doubting. You tell yourself it's normal. Everyone feels this way. But deep down, something doesn't add up. You have everything society told you to want, yet the silence inside is deafening. That's the first consequence. Emptiness disguised as achievement. You go through the motions, say the right things, chase the next promotion, post the next filtered photo, but none of it touches you anymore. Because when your thoughts are reactive, your life becomes performative. You aren't living, you're role-playing. And the more you perform, the more detached you become. Detached from your own needs, your own desires, your own truth. You become an echo chamber for other people's expectations. And the longer you play the role, the more the real you fades. Until one day, you wake up surrounded by everything you thought you wanted, and you feel nothing. No joy, no purpose, just noise. That's the tragedy of reactivity. It doesn't just steal your thoughts, it numbs your soul, and still, it gets worse. Because a reactive mind isn't just a passive victim of culture. It's a weapon. Reactiveness breeds tribalism. You see it in the comment sections, in the us versus them mentalities, in the way people seek enemies instead of understanding. Cognitive scientist Daniel Kahneman called it fast thinking, the automatic, emotional, impulsive mode of thought. It was meant for survival saber-toothed tigers and fire, but now it decides elections, shapes belief systems, destroys relationships. The more reactive you are, the more easily you're manipulated. Political strategists know this. Marketers know this. Even algorithms know this. That's why your news feed isn't designed to inform you. It's designed to trigger you. Each swipe, each scroll is a test. Will you react? Will you get angry enough to comment? Jealous enough to compare? Afraid enough to buy? It's not just about attention anymore. It's about possession. They don't want your eyes. They want your nervous system. This is how a culture of distraction becomes a culture of dissociation. You're always reacting, but rarely reflecting. Always consuming, but never digesting. Always expressing, but never understanding. And the psychological toll? Anxiety, burnout, identity confusion. You feel fragmented, like you're everywhere and nowhere at once. Your mind races, but nothing lands. You speak, but don't hear yourself. You think, but nothing feels true. You start to fear silence, because in silence, the false self begins to unravel. So you fill the void with more noise, more opinions, more scrolling, more outrage. It becomes an addiction to stimulation. But like any addiction, the more you feed it, the more hollow you become. And here's the final, most dangerous consequence. When you live in reaction long enough, you forget how to feel. Not just emotions. Anyone can feel anger or excitement, but the kind of feeling that connects you to depth, to meaning, to presence, to being. Instead of asking, what do I truly value? You ask, what will get me approval? Instead of feeling your pain and transforming it, you outsource it, blaming others, chasing distractions, numbing out. And the world around you mirrors this. A culture where thinking is labeled elitist, where outrage is monetized, where calm reflection is seen as weakness, where the loudest voice wins and the wisest one is drowned out. You become a stranger to yourself, a puppet on invisible strings. And the longer it goes unnoticed, the more it feels like reality. But what if it isn't? What if everything you mistake for normal is actually a distortion? What if the urgency, the fear, the self-doubt, the endless hunger, all of it is just the noise of a mind in captivity? There's a reason the great thinkers, from Epictetus to Jung, emphasized inner stillness. Because only in that stillness does the truth begin to whisper. And here's what it whispers. You are never meant to live like this. Your mind is not a battlefield. It's a compass, but only if you learn to listen. Not react, listen. Because beneath all the noise, there's still a part of you that remembers. Not the you that was conditioned, but the you that was conscious. And that part? It's still waiting. To break free, you must begin where no one ever taught you to look. The pause. Not the passive kind, not the moment between scrolling and swiping, but the radical, uncomfortable pause that interrupts your reflexes. The pause that asks, is this me? Or my programming? Is this thought born of freedom or fear? Do I believe this because it's true, or because I've never questioned it? This is where the rebellion begins. Not with noise, not with fighting the system head-on, but with stillness, with consciousness, with awareness so sharp it cuts through your own conditioning like a blade. Most revolutions are external. This one is internal. Because if your mind has been colonized by reaction, the most subversive act is to think slowly, to feel deeply, to refuse the urgency of the world around you. You don't need more information. You need discernment. You don't need louder opinions. You need to recognize your own silence. That's where your power lives. Not in knowing everything, but in knowing yourself. Start here. Next time you feel the need to react, don't. Sit with it. Let the discomfort rise. Let the emotion swell like a storm cloud. And then watch it. Don't chase it. Don't justify it. Don't resist it. Just observe. And ask yourself, what is this reaction protecting? You'll find that behind every impulsive emotion is a wound, a fear, a belief you didn't choose. And when you see it clearly, it begins to loosen its grip. This is what Jung meant when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But awareness isn't the final step. It's the beginning. The real rebellion comes when you reclaim authorship, when you no longer wait for society to tell you what matters, when you no longer need validation to feel whole, when your values are chosen, not inherited, when your beliefs are lived, not broadcasted. It will feel lonely, because consciousness separates you from the herd, not because you're better, but because you are awake. You will lose some people, but you will gain yourself. Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust and still taught this truth, that even in the most inhumane conditions, a person can choose their response. That between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is your freedom. You must learn to live in that space, to stretch it, to make it your home. Because in that space, you're no longer just reacting. You're creating, thinking, becoming. This is the essence of freedom, not the ability to do whatever you want, but the ability to choose who you are. Even when no one's watching, especially then. Want to know who you really are? Pay attention to what you choose when no one's pressuring you. Not what you say, not what you post, but what you decide when silence is the only witness. That's your real identity, not your trauma, not your followers. Not your thoughts even, but your attention. Because where your attention goes, your life follows. So reclaim it. Pull it back from the headlines, the algorithms, the knee-jerk outrage, and place it in the now. The real now, not the one curated for screens, but the one pulsing behind your breath. Right now, meditate, journal, reflect, but most of all, pause, because the pause is not empty. It is sacred. It is the birthplace of truth. It is where the puppet strings fall away, and you realize your hands were never tied, only busy holding illusions. From this stillness, everything changes. You start to feel things again, subtle things. Joy that isn't forced. Pain that teaches. Wonder that doesn't need to be posted. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And the world will try to pull you back, with noise, with urgency, with fear. But now you know, every reaction is a fork in the road. Down one path is your past. Down the other is your possibility. And with each pause, you choose. Again and again. Until choosing becomes your nature. Until thought becomes freedom. Until awareness becomes you. Now imagine this. You've slowed the mind. You've watched your reactions instead of becoming them. You've peeled back layer after layer, conditioning, fear, cultural scripts, emotional armor. And what's left? Not a blank slate, but something far more powerful. A presence. A consciousness that doesn't need to react because it sees. And when you reach that depth, something unexpected happens. You stop needing to know everything. You stop clinging to certainty, identity, and performance. Because you realize the mind was never meant to grasp reality. It was meant to meet it. And to meet life fully, you must be still enough to hear what's already there. Here is the ultimate truth, the one most people spend a lifetime avoiding. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. That awareness is not reactive. It doesn't rush. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't need approval because it is enough. It doesn't fear silence because it was born in silence. This is what the ancient mystics knew, what modern psychology hints at, what every transformative path points to in its own way. That true freedom is not the ability to control your life. It's the ability to witness it without being enslaved by it. When you realize this, the game changes. You stop trying to win arguments because truth is no longer a weapon. You stop defending your ego because there's nothing left to protect. You stop reacting to chaos because you've found the eye of the storm within. This doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean detachment from the world. It means moving from clarity, not compulsion. From authentic choice, not reactive loops. And you'll notice something strange. People who live this way calm, clear, inwardly free, they radiate a different kind of power. Not loud, not dominant, but undeniable. Because while everyone else is playing chess with their trauma, they've stepped off the board. They are not thinking more, they are thinking less. Because they've replaced noise with depth, speed with precision, reactivity with awareness. And in that awareness, they begin to live, not perform, to create, not copy, to choose, not react. So now the question turns inward. Not what's wrong with the world, but am I even here in this moment? Not why are people so reactive, but where in me am I still asleep? Because awakening isn't an event, it's a practice, a discipline, a returning again and again to that sacred stillness behind the noise. And here's the paradox. You cannot think your way into freedom. You have to unthink your way into it. Let go of the need to label, to react, to prove. Drop the compulsion to always have an answer. Step into the terrifying, beautiful uncertainty of presence. Because in that space, thought becomes a tool, not a trap. Emotion becomes a guide, not a master. And you finally become real. Not a reflection of other people's expectations. Not a patchwork of cultural programs. But a sovereign being, alive in their own awareness. The system doesn't want this. It wants you reactive. It wants you addicted to outrage, paralyzed by fear, chasing validation. Because a person who sees cannot be sold. A person who thinks cannot be controlled. A person who knows themselves is a danger to the lie. And so, the final rebellion is not against the world. It is against the false self, that part of you that was never you to begin with. That collection of reflexes, roles, and reactions. That echo of everyone else's noise. You do not need to become someone new. You only need to remember who you were before the noise began. And once you do, life changes. Not because the world shifts, but because your relationship to it does. You move through life like a clear mirror, reflecting but not absorbing, observing but not reacting, acting from truth, not fear. This is what it means to think, not to follow logic alone, but to move with awareness, to speak from essence, to live awake. And when you finally reclaim your mind, not as a battlefield, but as a sacred space, you'll understand this one final piercing truth. You are never reacting to the world. You are only reacting to the parts of yourself you hadn't yet made conscious. And now, you see, you choose. You are.